Good morning, everybody. Welcome back at long last to Cup of Jonah. Missed you guys. So, as you know, took a bit of a hiatus there for those exams, but thank goodness we passed them all and we're on to bigger and better things. But in terms of Cup of Jonah, as you remember, we've already gone through and talked about God's existence, whether he's one, whether he's simple, whether he's like all these different qualities, whether he's eternal, etc. And then more recently, we've been looking at, okay, if God knows things, what does he know? How does he know things? And the last day that we read was a little piece where Thomas presented us with 7 arguments against the claim that God could know singular individual things. And now he's going to respond to those arguments or those objections to what he believes is true. So let's hear what he has to say. First, don't forget to check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. All right. Chapter 65, that God knows singulars. We shall therefore first show that the knowledge of singulars cannot be lacking to God. It was shown above that God knows other things insofar as he is their cause. Other things are God's effect. God causes things insofar as he makes them to be in act. Universals, on the other hand, are not subsisting things, but rather have being only in singulars, as is proved in metaphysics. God therefore knows things other than himself, not universally, but also in the singular. So the philosophical term there, subsists. So when he says universals aren't so a subsisting is like a form that actually has a material. So like man is in Jonah. So Jonah has the subsisting form of man. So Jonah is man is the abstraction. It's the universal that applies to many things. Jonah would be the subsisting form here in me. Right? So this actually has, and actually the root of the word subsist is to stand under or to support. And so if you think about it, the abstract universal of what a man is doesn't have any accidents. Remember, any like secondary forms of being, like risibility or white or musical or any other equality, slightly overweight, but so as a something that subsists, it stands under accidents. So if you can call something other names or give other qualities or quantities or measure to something, then that thing is a subsisting thing out there, rather than just existing in the mind like a category or other things that we can think of like that. Does that make sense? Again, by knowing the principles of which the essence of a thing is composed, we necessarily know that thing itself. Thus, by knowing a rational soul and a certain sort of body, we know man. Now, the singular essence is composed of designated matter and individuated form. Thus, the essence of Socrates is composed of this body and this soul, just as the universal essence of man is composed of soul and body, as may be seen in Metaphysics 7. Hence, just as the latter principles fall within the definition of universal man, so the former principles would fall in the definition of Socrates if he could be defined. Hence, whoever has a knowledge of man and what its matter, and also of form individuated in matter, must have a knowledge of the singular. But the knowledge of God extends to matter and to individuating accidents and forms, for since his understanding is his essence, he must understand all things that in any way are in his essence. Now, within his essence, as within the first cause, there are virtually present all things that in any way have being, since he is the first and universal principle of being. Matter and accidents are not absent from among these things, since matter is a being in potency and an accident is a being in another. Therefore, the knowledge of singulars is not lacking to God. Moreover, the nature of a genus cannot be known perfectly unless its first differences in proper attributes are known. The nature of number would not be known perfectly if but universal and singular are references or differences or essential attributes of being. If then, in knowing his essence, God knows perfectly the common nature of being, he must know the universal and singular perfectly. But just as he would not know the universal perfectly if he knew the intention of universality and did not know the universal reality. For example, man or animal. So he would not know the singular perfectly if he knew the nature of the singularity and did not know this or that singular. Therefore, God must know singular things. Furthermore, just as God is his being, so as we have shown, he is his knowing. Now, since he is his being, all the perfections of being must be found in him, as in the first origin of being, as was shown above. Therefore, there must be found in his knowledge of knowledge, the perfection of all knowledge. But this would not be so if the knowledge of singulars were lacking to him, for the perfection of some knowers consists in this knowledge. Therefore, it is impossible for God not to have knowledge of singulars. Furthermore, among all ordered powers, it is commonly found that the higher power, though one, extends to several things, whereas a lower power extends to fewer things, which is nevertheless multiplied by its relation to them. This happens in the case of imagination and the sense. For one power of the imagination extends to all the things that the five powers of the senses know, and to more besides. But the knowing power in God is higher than it is in man. Therefore, whatever man knows by means of diverse powers, namely intellect, the imagination, and the senses, this God considers by his one simple intellect. God therefore knows the singulars that we apprehend by the sense and the imagination. Moreover, the divine intellect does not gather its knowledge from things, as ours does. Rather, as will be shown later on, it is through its knowledge the cause of things. The knowledge that the divine intellect has of other things is after the manner of practical knowledge. Now, practical knowledge is not perfect unless it reaches to singulars. For the end of practical knowledge is operation, which belongs to the domain of singulars. Therefore, the knowledge that God has of other things extends to singulars. So what's interesting, as we've seen time and time again through this volume that we've been moving through here, whenever this is a chapter of decent length, and he's presented a multitude of different arguments, 7 total, all approaching the same thing from a different angle to really solidify and lock down how we know this to be true. A sign of how important this is the length of this chapter, because there's only been a few chapters that he's gone at great lengths to. One of which was, is God one, right? But But there's, and he, as we've seen too, he keeps referring back all the time to past chapters. So this is going to be a very important chapter moving forward for reference as we roll. Furthermore, as was shown above, the first movable is moved by a mover moving through the intellect and appetite. Now, a mover could not cause motion through his intellect unless he moved the movable insofar it is of a nature to be moved in place. But this is true of the movable insofar as it is here and now, and consequently insofar as it is singular. Therefore, the intellect that is the mover of the first movable knows the first movable insofar as it is singular. Now, the mover is either held to be God, in which case we have made our point, or it is held to be some being below God. But if the intellect of such a being can by its power know the singular, which our intellect cannot, all the more will the intellect of God be able to do this. Again, the agent is more noble than the patient or the thing acted upon, as act is more noble than potency. Hence, a form of a lower grade cannot by acting extend its likeness to a higher grade. Rather, the higher form by acting can extend its likeness to a lower grade. Thus, from the incorruptible powers of the stars, there are produced corruptible forms amongst sublunary things. But a corruptible power cannot produce an incorruptible form. Sup, Shiva? Back, brother. Now, all knowledge takes place through the assimilation of the knower and the known. There is this difference, however, that the assimilation in human knowledge takes place through the action of sensible things on man's knowing powers, whereas in the case of God's knowledge, the assimilation takes place contrariwise through the action of the forms of the divine intellect on the things known. Hence, since the form of the sensible thing is individuated through its materiality, it cannot extend to the likeness of its singularity so that it can be absolutely immaterial. It can extend its likeness to the level of the powers that uses the material organs. It reaches the intellect only through the power of the intellect, of the agent intellect, insofar as it is completely divested of the conditions of matter. Thus, the likeness of the singularity of a sensible form cannot reach up to human intellect, but the likeness of the form in the divine intellect, by reaching to the least of things to which its causality reaches, extends to the singularity of the sensible and material form. The divine intellect, therefore, can know singulars, not the human intellect. Then too, if God does not know singulars, which even men know, there would follow the difficulty that the philosopher raises against Empedocles, namely, that God is the most foolish of beings. This truth that we have proved is likewise strengthened by the authority of sacred scripture. Remember here, he's doing what I love, where he'll take and first establish something by reason and then show that it was there for us to know all along in Scripture. For it is said in Hebrews, neither is there any creature invisible in his sight. End quote. The contrary error likewise is removed by Ecclesiasticus. Quote, say not, I shall be hidden from God, and who shall remember me from on high? End quote. It is also clear from what has been said how the objection to the contrary does not conclude properly. For although that by which the divine intellect understands is immaterial, It is nevertheless the likeness of both form and matter, being the first productive principle of both. So tomorrow we read the chapter titled, That God Knows the Things That Are Not. That'll be interesting. So, well, it certainly is good to be back and plugging through this with you. And I look forward to tomorrow. But wish me luck as I actually begin the duties now of my new role at my workplace. So, but anyhow, have a great rest of your day. Cheers, and we'll see you tomorrow.